Good morning, one and all. So, in the last few classes, we have discussed about anterior uveitis, intermediate and posterior uveitis. So, today we will complete uveitis by dealing with the topics endophthalmitis, panophthalmitis, sympathetic ophthalmitis, and various tumors of the uveal tract. So, first we will start with endophthalmitis. So, what is the definition of endophthalmitis? It is defined as inflammation of the inner structures of the eyeball. So, what are the inner structures of the eyeball? Retina as well as choroid tissue. So, associated outpouring of the exudates is present in the anterior chamber, posterior chamber, and the vitreous cavity. Etiologically, endophthalmitis can be either infectious or non-infectious endophthalmitis. So first we'll deal with infective endophthalmitis. So what are the various modes of infection? It can be by exogenous spread or endogenous spread or secondary infection. So what is exogenous infection? Here the source of infection is from the outside and it gains entry into the eye either by perforating injuries or due to perforated corneal ulcer or in the post-operative period after intraocular surgeries. So what is endogenous endophthalmitis? Here the infection is present in somewhere else in the body and through the bloodstream it gains focus into the eye. So what are the various sites of infection it can be present like caries tooth, puerperal sepsis and septicemia. And what is secondary infection? Here the infection spreads from adjacent structures of the eye like from the dacrocystitis, that is infection of the lacrimal sac, and corneal ulcers, orbital cellulitis and thrombophlebitis. All these can lead to infective endophthalmitis. So what are the various organisms which can cause endophthalmitis? It can be caused by bacteria as well as fungi. So what are the bacteria which are responsible for endophthalmitis? It can be either gram-positive or gram-negative cocci or well as bacillus. So the various bacteria are Staphylococcus epidermidis, aureus, pneumococcus, Pseudomonas, Bacillus cereus, Escherichia coli, Clostridium welchii, Propionibacterium acnes. This Propionibacterium acnes as well as Actinomycetes both are responsible for late onset and low grade endophthalmitis. And what are the various fungi responsible for endophthalmitis? These are Aspergillus, Fusarium and Candida. What is non-infective endophthalmitis? Non-infective. So it is sterile endophthalmitis. Sterile endophthalmitis, it refers to inflammation of the inner structures of the eyeball caused by certain toxins or toxic substances. So there are 4 types of sterile endophthalmitis. These are postoperative sterile endophthalmitis, post-traumatic sterile endophthalmitis, phacoanaphylactic endophthalmitis, and caused due to 4th one is intraocular tumors. So what is post-operative sterile endophthalmitis? So during intraocular operations like in cataract surgery, we place an intraocular lens in the eyeball after removing the cataract. So how is this IOL sterilized with the help of ethylene gas? So before placing the IOL, we have to wash the lens thoroughly. If we do not wash the IOL properly and some ethylene gases remain, it acts as a chemical and acts as a toxin and stimulates endophthalmitis. Similarly, the chemicals present with the instruments which are used during intraocular operations can also act as toxins leading to endophthalmitis. So this is called toxic anterior segment shock syndrome or TAS. So next is post-traumatic. So what is post-traumatic sterile endophthalmitis? Following any injury of the globe, there can be a retained intraocular foreign body or intraocular hemorrhage. So these can act as a toxic substance and lead to inflammatory reaction causing endophthalmitis. Next is phacoanaphylactic endophthalmitis. So what is phacoanaphylactic endophthalmitis? Phaco means lens. So in hypermature cataract, there is leakage of the lens proteins from the capsule. So these lens particles, they act as a toxic substance leading to inflammatory reaction and uveitis. So this is called phacoanaphylactic endophthalmitis. And next is intraocular tumor. The necrosis of the tumor releases small tumor particles into the eye. These act as a toxin leading to uveitis. So this has a masquerade syndrome. In endophthalmitis, the most important and most concerned is post-operative endophthalmitis. The incidence is 0.1%, but it is very blinding and catastrophic. So we'll deal with post-operative endophthalmitis in detail. Depending upon the onset, post-operative endophthalmitis can be either acute onset or delayed onset. So what is acute onset and what is delayed onset? If it occurs within 6 weeks of cataract surgery or any intraocular procedure, it is called acute onset post-op endophthalmitis. If it occurs after 6 weeks of the surgery, then it is called delayed onset post-op endophthalmitis. So we'll deal with first acute post-operative endophthalmitis. So as I said, it is occurring within 6 weeks of surgery. So what are the various organisms causing acute endophthalmitis? These are Coagulase negative Staphylococcus, Staph aureus, Pneumococcus, Pseudomonas and Streptococcus. So what is the source of these bacteria? It is lid and conjunctival flora. And next, what is delayed onset postoperative endophthalmitis? As I already mentioned, it occurs after 6 weeks after surgery. When the low virulent organism, it gets trapped within the capsular bag after cataract surgery because of any procedures like Nd:YAG capsulotomy. These organisms, they get released into the vitreous, leading to inflammatory reaction and endophthalmitis. So what are the common organisms causing delayed onset endophthalmitis? It is Propionibacterium acnes, Staphylococcus epidermidis and various fungi. So it manifests as persistent or recurrent uveitis following surgery. So what are the various risk factors associated with endophthalmitis? During the risk factors can be either before surgery or during the procedure. So what are the preoperative risk factors? If the patient has any associated infections in the eye, like conjunctivitis, corneal infection, dacrocystitis, chalazions, or any infection in the eyelids, all these can lead to endophthalmitis. Similarly, if the patient uses contaminated eye drops just prior to the surgery, this can also lead to, it acts as a source of inflammation and infection leading to endophthalmitis. So what are the operative risk factors? The various operative risk factors are wound abnormality. The generally performed procedure is small incision cataract surgery. Here the wound is self-sealing and without any sutures. If the wound integrity is not good, it leads to leakage of the aqueous humor, so it acts as a source of infection. Similarly, vitreous loss. If there is any posterior capsular tear, there is leakage of vitreous from the posterior segment into the anterior chamber and it gains entry into the wound. So it acts as a nidus for infection. And any prolonged combined surgeries also act as a source of infection. And also the irrigating solutions which we use like ringer lactate, DSS, if they are contaminated, these can also act as a source of infection for endophthalmitis. So what are the clinical manifestations? The main symptom is pain, redness, watering, photophobia along with diminished vision. So in post-op cases, the patient comes with pain along with swelling of the lid and decreased vision. If all these three symptoms are present, then we must have a diagnosis of endophthalmitis in our mind. So what are the systemic signs? It may be associated with raise of temperature along with headache and vomiting. If any other systemic features are present, it indicates some endogenous infection is also present. So what are the signs which we examine in the patient? As already mentioned, there will be decreased vision and lid edema will be present along with erythema. What are the conjunctival signs? There can be conjunctival chemosis along with hyperemia. And in the cornea, we have corneal edema and clouding. What is the anterior chamber findings? Similar to other uveitis, there will be cells and flare, and hypopyon is more common. Hypopyon means pus in the anterior chamber. And along with endophthalmitis, along with the anterior chamber, I said there is pouring of the exudates into the vitreous. So vitreous will also be filled with pus. That is called vitritis. So because of exudates in the vitreous, normally when we throw light into the pupillary area with the help of ophthalmoscope, what we see in the pupillary area? We see a red reflex. But in case of endophthalmitis, because of the exudates present in the vitreous, we see a yellowish white reflex in the pupillary area. This is called emerotic cat's eye pupil or leukocoria. And other associated features in the retina are scattered retinal hemorrhages. So these are the pictures showing endophthalmitis. In this first figure, what you can see, there is conjunctival hyperemia more along the limbus. So that is called circumcorneal congestion. And what do we see in the cornea? Here you can see cornea is hazy, edema is present, cloudy cornea with edema. And the second picture, what you can see, there is hypopyon. Hypopyon means pus in the anterior chamber. You can see a whitish yellow deposit in the anterior chamber inferiorly. This is hypopyon. And the third picture is necrosis and sloughing of the cornea in late stages. So next, coming to the management of endophthalmitis. After we have identified the case as endophthalmitis, what should we do? We must first thoroughly ask the patient about the history. So from where did he get the source of infection is important. And since how many days he is having pain and loss of vision, because early intervention can lead to improvement of the clinical picture. But if we have intervened late, then there is worse prognosis. After the patient history, then we have to thoroughly examine the patient in the slit lamp, both the anterior segment as well as posterior segment. Fundus examination is a must in case of endophthalmitis. But because there is anterior chamber hypopyon cells and flare and vitreous exudates, direct and indirect ophthalmoscope will be difficult to perform. In such cases, we have to do B scan, that is ultrasonography. So in ultrasonography, we can see hyperdense echoes in the vitreous. So next important investigation is vitreous tap and aqueous tap. So what is aqueous tap? I think you already know what is pleural tap and ascites tap. Similarly, here we have to drain the anterior chamber aqueous humor, and from the vitreous posterior segment we drain the vitreous. So aqueous tap is done with the help of 25 or 27 gauge needle. Into the anterior chamber we insert this needle and about 0.1 ml of the aqueous material is withdrawn and sent for culture and sensitivity. Similarly, vitreous tap. So how do we perform this vitreous tap? With the help of 23 gauge needle, a trans pars plana approach is done. So how is the what is the thickness of pars plana? It is about 3 to 5 mm. So we must put the needle about 3 mm posterior to the limbus in pseudophakic eye and aphakic eyes. Whereas in phakic eyes, we have to place the needle 4 mm posterior to the limbus in order to prevent damage to the zonules. So after inserting the needle, we have to withdraw 0.2 ml of the vitreous and send it for culture and sensitivity. So what are investigations we have done? We have done B scan, aqueous tap, vitreous tap, and thorough history should be taken. So after history and investigation, so we'll proceed with the treatment. The main important treatment is intravitreal antibiotics. At the earliest, we have to give intravitreal antibiotics. The main antibiotics of choice are, we have to give a combination of the antibiotics. One which deals with the gram-positive bacilli cocci and another one drug which deals with the gram-negative bacilli. So we have to choose a combination. The first choice of combination is vancomycin 1 mg in 0.1 ml with ceftazidime 2.25 mg in 0.1 ml. Or a second choice alternative is vancomycin with amikacin. Amikacin dosage is 0.4 mg in 0.1 ml. Amikacin comes under which type of antibiotic? It is an aminoglycoside. So aminoglycosides, they have retinotoxic effect. Gentamicin has 4 times more toxic effect on retina when compared to amikacin, but amikacin also causes retinotoxicity. So if ceftazidime is not available, then only we go for amikacin. Otherwise, first choice of antibiotic regimen is vancomycin with ceftazidime. And other intravitreal drug we give is steroids. We have to combine steroids so as to decrease the inflammatory reaction. So which steroid we use? Dexamethasone 0.4 mg in 0.1 ml. If we suspect it to be a fungal etiology, then we have to give amphotericin 5 micrograms in 0.1 ml. So this is intravitreal injections. Next, coming to topical antibiotics. So what are the topical antibiotics we use? We use fortified topical antibiotics, either cefazolin, vancomycin, amikacin or gentamicin. The concentrations are cefazolin 5%, vancomycin also 5%, amikacin and gentamicin in the concentration of 1.3%. They have to be given starting every half an hourly and later 1 hourly. Other topical drugs we use are cycloplegics. Atropine eye drops 1% 3 times a day is given. Anti-glaucoma therapy is also to be substituted and added along with these steroids as well as antibiotics. Next, coming to systemic drugs. So systemic antibiotics, they have a limited role. We can give either ciprofloxacin, vancomycin or cefazolin. Along with systemic antibiotics, systemic steroids should also be given, but only after 24 hours of intensive antibiotic therapy. First, we have to start with daily therapy of 60 milligrams, and then we have to reduce it with 10 mg every 2 days. Like after 2 days of 60 mg therapy, then we have to give 50 mg for 2 days, and then taper it to 40 mg 2 days. Like that, we have to taper it to 10 mg 2 days. Another mode of treatment is pars plana vitrectomy. When is pars plana vitrectomy advised? It is advised when the visual acuity on presentation is only perception of light or no PL, or when the patient is not responding to intravitreal antibiotics. Already we have given intravitreal antibiotics and waited for 2 days. If there is no improvement of the vision or pain or any clinical picture, then we have to proceed for pars plana vitrectomy. And in also cases where we suspect fungal infection and vitreous abscess, vitrectomy should be performed. The optimum time for vitrectomy to be done is 24 hours after intravitreal antibiotics if there is no improvement. So how do you monitor the patient with endophthalmitis? After giving the treatment, we have to review the patient every 4 to 6 hourly. And after giving the intravitreal antibiotics, we have to wait for 2 days. If there is no improvement, meanwhile we'll receive the vitreous tap and aqueous tap culture sensitivity reports. So depending upon its sensitivity, we can change the antibiotic. And the visual outcome is mainly influenced by the duration between the onset of the infection and the institution of the therapy, and also the virulence of the infective organism. So that completes endophthalmitis. So we have dealt with what is endophthalmitis. So it is an infection of the inner structures of the eyeball, that is retina as well as the uveal tissue, and there is outpouring of the exudate. So what are the types of endophthalmitis? It can be infective and non-infective. Non-infective means sterile endophthalmitis, that is of 4 types: post-traumatic, post-surgical, phacoanaphylactic endophthalmitis, and caused due to intraocular tumors. And next we have dealt with post-op endophthalmitis, in that there are acute onset and delayed onset. And what are the bacteria causing endophthalmitis? What are the fungi causing endophthalmitis? So what is the clinical features of endophthalmitis? We have dealt with pain, redness, photophobia. All these are the symptoms, and on examination, anterior to posterior, all signs I have told, and leukocoria or hemerotic cat's eye reflex is one important sign in endophthalmitis. And how do you investigate and treat a case? So main modality of treatment is intravitreal antibiotics along with intravitreal steroids, topical antibiotics and steroids, systemic antibiotics, though of minimal role, generally they are given. Systemic steroids are also given, topical cycloplegics, anti-glaucoma medication, and the final and last resort is immediate pars plana vitrectomy within 2 days. So that is about endophthalmitis. So next we will proceed with panophthalmitis. So what is panophthalmitis? Here there is intense purulent inflammation of the whole eyeball, including the Tenon's capsule. So similar to endophthalmitis, here the etiology is exogenous and endogenous. And the clinical picture also, it is almost similar to endophthalmitis, except that here there is marked pain along with proptosis, and vision is almost completely absent. That is, no perception of light will be present. And in the examination, we can see lid edema, hyperemia, proptosis of the eyeball with restriction of the ocular movements, and pain will be present during movement of the eyeball. Similar to ENDOF, we have here conjunctival chemosis, congestion, cloudy cornea, anterior chamber with pus, and IOP is markedly raised. And sometimes we can see globe perforation at the limbus. Vision, as I said here, it is in contrast to endophthalmitis. Here, vision is completely absent. That is no PL. What is the treatment? We have to give systemic analgesics to relieve the pain. And broad spectrum of antibiotics we have to give to subside the infection in the meantime. Evisceration, if there is marked pain, then we have to go for evisceration. So what is evisceration? It is removal of the intraocular contents leaving behind the sclera. There are two types of evisceration. One is simple evisceration, another one is frill evisceration. So what is simple evisceration? Here all the intraocular contents are scooped out, leaving the total sclera behind. And what is frill evisceration? Here all the intraocular contents along with a part of sclera is removed, and only 3 mm of the sclera is left behind surrounding the optic nerve. So why we must do evisceration? Because it prevents the spread of the infection intracranially through the dura mater of the optic nerve. So we'll see a video of evisceration. So this is a video of just a second. There is a problem with the sharing of video. Are you able to see the video? So here first we have to separate the conjunctiva and tenons from the sclera, and later we have to give an incision at the limbus, and then we have to remove the cornea with the help of corneal scissors. And this instrument is the evisceration spatula. With the help of this evisceration spatula, we have to separate the sclera from the choroid. After separating the sclera from the choroid, this instrument is the evisceration scoop or spoon. With the help of this, we remove all the intraocular contents. So that is removal of all the intraocular contents. So that one is the vitreous gel. And that is the choroid, you can see. Hello, sir, Rara. Okay. So we are separating the sclera and giving antibiotics. ఇది వీడియో పెట్టాను వాళ్ళకి కనిపిస్తుందా లేకపోతే కనిపిస్తుందా అంటే మళ్ళీ నాది వీడియో కనిపించట్లేదు కనిపిస్తుందా అదే డౌట్ ఒక్క నిమిషం ఇక్కడే ఉండండి అడగండి later we have placed an implant with the antibiotics so that there will not be any infection and then suturing is done. Tenon should be sutured horizontally and conjunctiva should be sutured vertically. Tenon is sutured with the help of 80 Vicryl and conjunctiva is sutured with the help of 6080 silk. So what are the other indications of evisceration? Panophthalmitis, expulsive choroidal hemorrhage, bleeding, anterior staphyloма. వీడియో రావట్లేదు అదే నేను అదే అడుగుతున్నాను అయితే ఇందాక వీడియో కూడా అవ్వలేదా వీడియో అయ్యిందా లేదా ఒకసారి అడగండి అదే ఈ సైడ్ వీడియో వచ్చిందా లేదా ఒకసారి అడగండి మళ్ళీ అవ్వట్లేదుగా వీడియో ప్లే అయిపోయింది ఇది పీపీటీ ఎలాగా Hope it is recording now. I have started recording. Confirm with me if it is not getting recorded. Okay, thank you. So exciting eye, the main symptom is pain, redness and photophobia, but these are less when compared to regular uveitis, and occurrence of keratic precipitates is a warning sign. Next, coming to the symptoms of the sympathizing eye. So that is the contralateral eye. Here the main complaints are divided into two stages, prodromal stage and fully developed stage. In the prodromal stage, patient mainly complains of photophobia, and the important symptom is patient is unable to see the near objects clearly. This is because of failure of accommodation. And on examination, the first sign which is important is occurrence of keratic precipitates and retrolental flare. The second stage is fully developed stage. Here the patient presents with acute plastic iritis. So when does sympathetic ophthalmitis occur? It generally occurs within 4 to 8 weeks following injury, but it can occur as early as 9 days, and mostly all the cases occur within 1 year after injury. So how do you proceed with the management? So this is a picture showing. What do you see in this picture? You have already seen this picture. So these are keratic precipitates. These all white, fluffy, lardaceous keratic precipitates. So these are called mutton fat keratic precipitates, and they are seen in granulomatous uveitis. So how do you treat a case of sympathetic ophthalmitis? So main important thing is prophylaxis. Even before the onset of sympathetic ophthalmitis, we have to deal with the prophylaxis. So if the injured eye has no vision, there is no useful vision in the injured eye, then we have to excise the injured eye. If there is any useful vision in the injured eye, then what we must do? We must meticulously repair the wound. We must be careful that while during closure of the wound, there should not be any incarceration of the iris. That is, iris or ciliary body or choroid. These structures should not be included within the wound. And we have to immediately initiate the patient on steroid therapy. And we have to wait for 2 weeks after starting the steroid therapy. And if the steroids are not helpful, then we have to go for excision of the globe. Next, coming to treatment of the sympathetic ophthalmitis per se. So the patient has come to us after the onset of sympathetic ophthalmitis. That is, the sympathizing eye has already developed the symptoms. So at the earliest, we must start the patient on corticosteroids. So these steroids, these can be given either topically or periocular injections as well as systemic steroids. If the patient is not responding to corticosteroids or the patient has come to us in a late stage, then what we must give? We must start them on immunosuppressants. Along with this, we must also give cycloplegics to relieve the iris spasm. So the preferred cycloplegic is the most strong cycloplegic, that is atropine. It is given 1% eye drops, eye ointment 3 times a day. So what is the prognosis of sympathetic ophthalmitis? If we diagnose the sympathetic ophthalmitis early and started on steroids, then the vision can be retained in the eye. If the patient comes in a later stage, then the prognosis is very poor even after the best treatment. So sympathetic ophthalmitis, it occurs following injuries. So which type of injuries are more prone for sympathetic ophthalmitis? It occurs when there is wound involving the ciliary zone and there is incarceration of the iris, ciliary body or lens capsule, and it can also occur after intraocular procedures, but this is very rare. So what are the two eyes? Sympathizing eye and exciting eye. What is the main pathognomic feature? That is Dallen-Fuchs nodules. Next, on clinical features, we have the first sign in the sympathizing eye is retrolental flare or keratic precipitates. What is the treatment? Prophylactically, if the vision is not present in the injured eye, then we have to excise the eye. But if there is useful vision, we have to do meticulous repair of the wound, start the patient on corticosteroids, and we have to wait for 2 weeks for the response to occur. If there is no response, then we have to excise the injured eye. After sympathetic ophthalmitis is ensured, then we have to start the patient. First, we have to try conservative therapy, and then if there is no improvement with conservative therapy, then we have to go for excision. So this completes sympathetic ophthalmitis. So until now, we have discussed end-off, pan-off, evisceration, and sympathetic ophthalmitis. So the last topic in today's class is tumors of the uveal tract. This is actually not very important for you. Just I have given a brief outline of the various tumors present. There can be tumors of the iris, ciliary body, and choroid. In iris, the benign tumors are nevus, benign cyst, and nevoxanthoendothelioma. Tumors of the ciliary body, benign tumors are hyperplasia, benign cyst, and medulloepithelioma. In tumors of the choroid, we have benign tumors, that is nevus, hemangioma, melanocytoma, and choroidal osteoma. In all these tumors, the malignant tumors are melanoma. Of all these tumors, the tumor which is important to you is malignant melanoma of the choroid, which I will discuss in detail. So we will proceed with malignant melanoma of the choroid. So it is the most common primary intraocular tumor of adults. This is a PG bit for you. What is the age? Age of onset is 40 to 70 years and it is more common in whites. It is solitary and unilateral and it arises from the neural crest derived pigment cells of the uvea. Gross pathological appearance, we have two types of appearance. One is circumscribed pedunculated tumor and other one is diffuse malignant melanoma. So how does the circumscribed pedunculated tumor appear as? First, it starts as a flat slate gray area and later it breaks through the Bruch's membrane and it erupts into the vitreous. So this is called collar stud tumor. Along with the breakage through the Bruch's membrane, it also produces exudative retinal detachment. Next, coming to diffuse malignant melanoma. This spreads slowly throughout the area, so it manifests any symptoms later. So this is a picture showing malignant melanoma of the choroid in the peripheral part. This is the tumor. After full dilatation of the pupil, you can see the tumor encroaching into the pupillary area. This is a diffuse melanoma present near the optic disc. So this is slate gray in color and the most important sign is these orange pigments. This is due to presence of lipofuscin deposition in the tumor area. Histopathologically, there are four types: spindle cell melanoma, epithelioid cell melanoma, mixed cell melanoma and necrotic melanoma. So what is spindle cell melanoma? Here we see spindle shaped cells and it accounts for about 45% of the cases. And spindle cell melanoma has best prognosis. Next type is epithelioid malignant cell melanoma. Here the cells are large with round and a large nucleus with abundant eosinophilic cytoplasm. So epithelioid malignancy has worst prognosis, but it causes only 5% of the tumors. Next type is mixed cell melanoma. This is a variant of both spindle as well as epithelioid cell melanoma. So it carries medium prognosis, that is in between spindle and epithelioid cells. This accounts for another 45% of the tumor. And last one is necrotic melanoma. This causes about 5% of the cases, and in this the actual histological pattern is not clear. Clinical features, we have four stages: quiescent stage, glaucomatous stage, extraocular spread and distant metastasis. In quiescent stage, here the patient will not have any symptoms and on routine examination we can see the tumor, identify the tumor. Depending upon the location, the symptoms will vary. If that tumor is peripheral and it is very small in size, the patient will not have any symptoms. If the tumor is in the posterior pole, then it causes early vision loss and it can also lead to retinal detachment. And what is glaucomatous stage? Here the patient has severe pain, redness, watering and photophobia. Why does it cause glaucoma? Because if it is present in the peripheral part, it can impinge on the vortex veins as well as the drainage of the aqueous humor will be impaired here. Similarly, it can also cause anterior forward displacement of the lens. So the iris will be pushed forward, leading to blockage of the angle and causes angle closure glaucoma. So on examination, patient will have circumcorneal congestion along with edema of the cornea, and anterior chamber will be shallow because there is forward displacement of the iris. As mentioned previously, in glaucoma, pupil will be vertically oval, mid-dilated and fixed. And how will be the IOP? It will be elevated. Next, coming to stage of extraocular spread. Here the tumor, it breaks through the sclera. Most commonly it breaks at the limbus and manifests as a nodule exteriorly. Next stage is stage of distant metastasis. Blood-borne spread is most common and distant metastasis to liver is the most common type. Here these are the pictures showing various types of melanoma. This is a highly pigmented melanoma. This is amelanotic melanoma. It arises from the melanocytes, but there is few pigment here. That is called amelanotic melanoma. In this you can see orange pigment caused due to deposition of lipofuscin. This is a collar stud abscess. That is, as I already mentioned, it is a circumscribed pedunculated tumor. First, it origins as a diffuse gray area and later it erupts through the Bruch's membrane as a collar stud abscess. This is also a picture of diffuse melanoma, and here you can see exudative retinal detachment anterior to the tumor. And this is a picture of extraocular spread. Here the choroidal melanoma, it spreads through the sclera and manifests as a small nodule. Next, investigation. In ultrasound, we see mass which is extending from the choroids. Here you can see two lines. So this is retina and this is choroid. So we can see the mass which is coming from the choroid and it is protruding through the retina into the vitreous. So this is called collar stud abscess. So this is B-scan or B-scan ultrasonography. Here you can see corresponding spikes in the A-scan. And on MRI, we see hyperintense structure in the choroid. So this is a hyperintense structure in the choroid. How do you treat a case of malignant melanoma? If it is small and we are doubtful about the diagnosis, generally we leave the patient for an observation. We have to ask the patient to come for regular follow-ups and we have to observe for any signs of malignancy during the frequent follow-ups. We have to see for any RD or lipofuscin pigment deposition or increase rapidly in the size and thickness of the tumor. All these are suspicious of malignancies. So until then we have to observe the patient. And when do we do conservative treatment? If the size is less than 16 mm and the thickness is about 10 mm. So what are the various types of conservative managements? They are brachytherapy, external beam irradiation, transpupillary thermotherapy and transscleral excision of the tumor. Next we do enucleation, that is removal of the entire eyeball as a whole. In the previous evisceration, we have seen that we are leaving tenons, conjunctiva and a part of sclera and only removing the intraocular contents. That is called evisceration. And in contrast, enucleation, we remove the total globe as a unit. That is called enucleation. And next is exenteration. When the spread of the tumor is into the extraocularly, then we have to do exenteration. And in palliative chemotherapy, this is reserved for patients with distant metastasis, where we have to just use chemotherapy and immunosuppressive agents to prolong the life of the patient. So that is the treatment of choroidal malignant melanoma. So in malignant melanoma, it arises from the, to brief out about malignant melanoma, it arises from neural crest cells, ages 40 to 70 years, and it is the most common intraocular malignancy of adults. And pathologically, two types, circumscribed pedunculated, second one is diffuse malignant melanoma. Histopathologically, four types, spindle and epithelioid, mixed and necrotic. Spindle has the best prognosis, epithelioid has the worst prognosis. And coming to the clinical features, four stages, quiescent stage, glaucomatous stage, extraocular spread and metastasis. Next, coming to treatment, we have to observe conservative management, enucleation, exenteration and palliative chemotherapy depending upon the size and stage of the tumor. So with this we complete uveitis topic. If you have any doubts you can ask quickly because I have prepared a small session of PPT for you showing some MCQs. You will be answering them randomly. If you want, I'll pick up some numbers to answer. Otherwise, whoever knows, they can post the answer in the chat. So do you have any questions? You can ask, or otherwise I'll show you the questions. So do you want me to start the questions? So I am starting with the first question. The question is, a 60-year-old female having history of cataract surgery 1 year back. She now complains of sudden onset painful diminution of vision and was diagnosed as a case of late onset endophthalmitis. The organism most commonly implicated is Pseudomonas aeruginosa, Staphylococcal epidermidis, Candida albicans, and Propionibacterium acnes. So that is very good. You are listening to the class. The answer is Propionibacterium acnes. So someone has typed it as A. No, the answer is Propionibacterium acnes. It is responsible for delayed onset endophthalmitis. So the next question. All of the following are involved in endophthalmitis except retina, vitreous, sclera, and uvea. So what is the answer for this question? You have not listened to the definition of the first person 100. Who is it? They have written as A. So what is endophthalmitis? It is inflammation of the inner structures of the eyeball, that is retina as well as uvea. So the sclera is not involved in endophthalmitis. If the sclera and tenons are involved, it is called panophthalmitis. Very good. So the next question. A 30-year-old female had complaints of floaters with blurring of vision, and on indirect ophthalmoscopy, the patient had clear central fundus. Okay. But there was inflammation of the peripheral part. So what is your diagnosis? So read the question carefully. It is either panuveitis, posterior-uveitis, endophthalmitis, or pars planitis. So what is your answer? Floaters are present and central fundus is clear. Only the peripheral part is inflamed. So what is that called? Panuveitis means, what is panuveitis? It is inflammation of the all the structures of uvea, that is iris, ciliary body, and choroid. So here central part is normal, so it is not panuveitis. Posterior uveitis means posterior part is involved. Here central fundus means posterior pole. It is normal, so it is not posterior uveitis. Yes, the answer is pars planitis. Next question. A 50-year-old female having history of cataract surgery 1 week back. She had complaints of sudden onset, painful diminution of vision, redness and watering, and on clinical examination, she had hypopyon, AC cells and flare with vitreous exudate. So what is your diagnosis? What is the diagnosis of this? Is it PANOPH, posterior uveitis, endophthalmitis, or panophthalmitis? So what is the answer? Yes, the answer is endophthalmitis. Next question. I think it is the same. So what is the organism which is responsible for this? In the previous question, the clinical picture is same. And what is the most common organism responsible for the condition is the question. So what is the most common organism for acute post-op endophthalmitis? It is Staphylococcus epidermidis. Yes, very good. Staphylococcus epidermidis is the cause. So next question. What is the most common cause of loss of vision in pars planitis? Is it due to panuveitis, posterior uveitis, CME, or floaters? What is the most common cause of loss of vision in pars planitis? So it is cystoid macular edema. In pars planitis, there is edema of the macular area leading to loss of vision. Next question. Snow banking. It is seen in panuveitis, posterior uveitis, endophthalmitis, or pars planitis. What is the answer? So the answer is pars planatus. What is Dahlen-Fuchs nodules? They are seen in, coming to the next question. What are Dahlen-Fuchs nodules? They are seen in sympathetic ophthalmitis, posterior uveitis, or endophthalmitis. What is the answer? Yes, very good. Sympathetic ophthalmitis. Next, mutton fat keratic precipitates. They are seen in all except tuberculosis, Fuchs heterochromia cyclitis, sarcoidosis, and fungal infection. All except is the question. Read it carefully. No, 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 no. The answer is Fuchs heterochromia iridocyclitis. I have mentioned a specific type of keratic precipitates in Fuchs heterochromic iridocyclitis. What is it? So what I taught in the previous classes is all vanished from your brains. In Fuchs, we see what is the type of KP in Fuchs? Yes, stellate KPs. So mutton fat KPs are seen in all except Fuchs. What is the mainstay of treatment in anti-uveitis? Very good. I expect all of you to answer this properly because the previous batches in the exam, they have answered it as antibiotics. So the mainstay of treatment is corticosteroids. What are the anti-glaucoma drugs which are contraindicated in uveitis? Yes, pilocarpine is the drug which is contraindicated in uveitis. Why? Because it flares up the inflammatory reaction. What is the normal size of the pupil? What is the normal size of the pupil? Yes, 3 to 4 mm is the normal size of the pupil. What is the thinnest part of the iris? So what is the thinnest part of the iris? Iris root, very good. So because iris root is thinnest part during any injuries, there will be iridodialysis. Next question. Sphincter pupillae is derived from. Very good. Neuroectoderm. Not ectoderm. Neuroectoderm is the right answer. Typical coloboma is present in which quadrant? Typical coloboma is present in inferior. Yes, inferonasal part is the right answer. So most of you have answered the questions correctly. So I think that uvea topic is there in your brains and you have understood it well. So if you have any more doubts, you are free to ask. Otherwise, that is complete. Okay, so next class will be taken by our HOD sir. It is on lens. So I hope uvea is clear for you. If you have any doubts later also, you can ask me. Thank you.